you can see me afterwards. And yeah, thank you. And we'll get that sorted. And then if you can either drop them off at ours before Tuesday or bring them here to the church, or if you want to come Tuesday evening, bring them then so that we can then distribute them to all the young people. Thank you. So, clicker. Bless him. A holy moment. That's what we've been looking at. Opportunities, times, availabilities, places and events and circumstances in our lives when God can use us. Whether you believe in him or not, the opportunities are always there. And they're called holy moments because God can do miraculously more than we ever thought possible. And we've got to believe that. We've got to believe it because there's evidence of it. I know people who have seen and have had the miraculous happen. And I have witnessed it myself. I could be a lunatic. Some of you probably think I am. But there are get on there. There are those who aren't, and I trust them, and I believe them, and I fully believe some of you as well have seen the miraculous or been a part of the miraculous. It's opportunities that God can use us to further his kingdom, further his glory. And so we're looking at the opportunities to have holy moments each and every day. Have any of you ever cut corners while doing a job? Thought maybe, not literally cut a corner being a builder, but cut corners. Anyone ever lied? Yes. Anyone gone speeding? No one knows, no one sees, does it really matter? How about this? Do you know anyone who potentially cuts corners in their jobs or lies or maybe does a bit of speeding? Does it bother you when you see that happening? You're doing a good job and you see someone else doing something that just, it's like it's not up to standards. Does it bother you? Why? Ooh, all smarty pants now. Why? Why does it bother you when you're doing 70 on the dot and someone comes racing by? Standards. Ooh. But you just said, you've opened your mouth, so you're going to get it. You've just said yourself that you do stuff. So if you have standards of other people, but you do it yourselves, ooh. Ooh. So all of us, and I mean this, all of us are imperfect. And I'll be the first to admit, that's right, we shouldn't be pointing fingers. I'll be the first to admit that I sometimes do have double standards. I know, it's shocking. I expect everyone to abide by the speed limit, even though I don't. And I justify it because I've been trained. I'm an advanced driver. I know, so therefore, it's okay. In a previous job, I used to go home early on certain occasions because I would work late maybe one day and I wouldn't get paid for it. So I kind of justified it and said, well, it's okay because I worked extra the other day. The problem is I was being paid for that hour. I was being paid for that day to work from this point to the end point. And no matter how I try to justify it, it is still stealing. And it's hard to understand that because we want to justify, because we want to do things. But does it really matter? Yeah? Does it matter? Throughout our lives, we don't always do our best. We don't. We've got to acknowledge that. We don't always give 100%. And on the whole, as I said, we try and justify it. Is that fair to say? We're tired, we're busy, things happen, and so we don't give our all. And we justify it. I imagine we all want to give our best. I would presume all of us are fairly decent people. We all want to do the best we can. But when we're struggling with certain situations, When life has taken a turn for the worse, when we feel aggrieved by something, we are more likely to cut corners. We are more likely to lie. We are more likely to speed, or whatever is the flavor of the month for you. Is it fair to say it's not always easy to give 100% of the time? Especially when we think it won't make a difference. I don't think this makes us bad people. However, we all have an opportunity to do what is right. We all have an opportunity to give our best, to be honest, and to do the best we can in every situation. So last week we looked at surrendering our plans for God. It's yours, Lord. And we do this by actively listening, by going to God, by praying and reading His Word, by listening to those around us who are spiritually wise, by asking ourselves, is this for my glory or for God's? Is this job going to support God's kingdom or is it for me? Is my giving in the offering in the hopes that God will be blessed or that I may reap the rewards from it? And it's an understanding that God's plan may actually be different than our plans. And that's hard to accept sometimes. And we have a choice each and every day. Do I trust God? Do I trust that what God has planned for me is far greater than what I am able to understand and be able to do? Do I willingly go where God calls me? And this week is kind of a follow-on from that surrendering. We're looking at being faithful in little things, the everyday things, the things which maybe nobody sees or nobody actually cares about. So in our reading, we heard about a nice older couple, Zachariah and Elizabeth. And it'd be very easy to ignore them. We tend not to discuss them very often. We hear about it in the stories, but let's be fair. Their story is intersected by another story, and actually the greatest story ever told. We hear about Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus. And this story of them is far greater than we kind of recognize sometimes, because the story of Zachariah and Elizabeth has tremendous impact on us. But Mary and Joseph, they surrendered their lives. They surrendered their plans. They obeyed. And that's what we look at. But we forget that sometimes it's the other stories that we may need to focus on. And so we're looking at this unassuming story of two older people. We don't know what ages they are. We just know they were older. So you may associate with that age. You may not. I don't know. But it's two older people. So the first one is Zachariah. And Zachariah was a priest in one of the 24 orders. This is a little bit of history to understand this. And he would have been required to go into the temple. And the temple would have been this huge, massive temple in Jerusalem. It was vitally important. They would have gone there, and they would have gone into the inner bit of the temple, and they would have lit candles. They would have done the incense and altars. It was an incredibly important role. So important that they had to follow certain procedures. And in the Old Testament, what we hear about is they used to wrap rope around them with bells. And all the priests outside who weren't charged with going in would be there waiting. And if the bells stopped jingling and the rope became taut, the idea or the thought was that something had happened, and they would pull the person out, the priest out. They couldn't just go in there. This was how sacred and important and vital God wanted us to understand His glory. It wasn't just a trivial thing. It was vital. It was important. And so Zechariah was in charge at that particular time to do this. Being a priest in those days was incredibly important, unlike the riffraff you get nowadays in these Baptist ministers. And then we read about Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was in the line of Aaron, and Aaron was the brother of Moses. Moses was, for those of you who don't know, Moses was in the days of the Old Testament, and they were instrumental in freeing the Israelites. And so we have two incredibly important people, really, 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 really important people. And we think, well, these are the religious people of the day. It's very vital. We need to take a hold of this and what it actually means. But they weren't just important because of their roles, because of them being religious. There is something else about these two, and we read about it in verse 6. Both of them were righteous before God. What does that look like? Both of them were righteous before God. Anyone just shout out. What do you think that means? What does it look like?
Doing the right thing even when no one's looking.
Ooh, doing the right thing even though no one's looking. What else? Anyone else? What do they think it is to be righteous before God? Obedient, yeah. Anyone else? Pleasing God. Do we think they walked around always happy, always smiling? Did they look after the poor? Were they always encouraging, always joyful? Was their house immaculate? Did they give to the poor all of their earnings? Did they have them come to their house? Did they eat their Brussels sprouts? Imagine that on your CV. You know, education, jobs, this and that, and then righteous before God. I encourage everyone to do that. If you're applying for a job, can I just put on there on your CV, righteous before God? See what happens. If you get sacked because of it, it's not my fault. But they lived out the laws blamelessly, and they were seen as righteous. They weren't righteous because of their beliefs. We need to understand this. You are not righteous because you believe in God. You're made righteous because the belief turns into an action. It changes your heart. And so Zechariah and Elizabeth had a changed heart, and they lived because of that changed heart. They lived their beliefs. I said before that one of the most scariest verses in the Bible is Matthew 7:21, and it's where the Lord tells the people, many in the end days will say, Lord, Lord. In other words, many will say, I know Jesus. And Jesus will say, I don't know you. I don't know you because all you gave was lip service. All you gave was meaningless under the sun. You didn't actually know me. You didn't have a relationship with me. Your life actually wasn't changed. And so I cast you out. That's scary. The all-loving, almighty, all-caring, wonderful Father is saying to us, there will be those who actually don't really know me, even though they say they do. Do you come to church because it's just something that you do? Or do you come to church because it's who you are? Zechariah and Elizabeth lived their lives by what they believe, and God said they were righteous in His eyes. And we think all is great, all is wonderful, all must be easy for them. But then we carry on with our reading and we get this. But they had no children because Elizabeth was not able to conceive. And they were both very old. This would have been devastating. Children were seen as a blessing from God in those days. It was a way of passing on your family line. And for those people of the status that Elizabeth and Zechariah were, this would have been even more devastating. They were looked upon as being righteous and holy. They were priests, they were in the family line, and yet they're not having children. There would have been concerns. There would have been questions. And it's reminiscent a little bit about Abraham and Sarah. If you're unsure of that, just have a look at that story. But as time went by, I imagine, there's nothing to say this, but I imagine, because they were human, that they got a bit tired of doing right all the time. That maybe they didn't quite do the ceremony as well as they could have. That maybe they didn't give all they could have given. And I have to confess, it is hard sometimes to be steadfast every day. It is hard. Can I say that to you guys? It is hard to be steadfast and righteous and do the right thing every single day. It is difficult. And I imagine there's some of you who get tired of this. You wake up, you go to work, you come home, you go to bed, repeat. A bit like Groundhog Day. And it's the same thing over and over again. But you want to do your best. So you say your prayers, you read the Bible, you do the washing up, you clean the house. Does it really matter? Will it make any difference? Does anyone really care? Can't we just have a day off from being good? Just one day. I'm tired. Zechariah and Elizabeth had plans, but God had different plans for them. And they carried on each day, trusting in God, living for God. But as I said earlier, it wouldn't have been easy. But they were faithful. Surrendering their will to God, they diligently lived each day in service to God. And finally, out of the blue, we get this story, the angel coming in and saying, guess what? You're going to have a child. But Zechariah didn't believe it. I mean, how could he? How long did he wait? How many times did he pray for this event to take place? How many jeers and questions did he face, did Elizabeth face? How many friends who had children and maybe even grandchildren while they didn't? They would have been frustrated. And the angel said, your prayers are answered. Really? Now? We're old. We're tired. You're going to bless us with children now? I don't blame him. But it's no excuse. You said you loved the Lord. You said you would follow him. You said you would live for him. Not if things went well. You made a promise, not my will, but yours be done. And so I understand Zechariah. It's still an excuse. Who are you to make demands on God's plans? And as a result of this denial, refusal to accept this could be true, Zechariah was struck with being mute and deaf. All that faithfulness in God, all that hard work, all that diligence, in one moment of weakness, more tragedy. I don't understand it. But God is God. We are human. We don't quite understand the future. If ever there was a moment in time for someone to put their fists up to God, it certainly would have been Zechariah. It simply wasn't fair. I worked hard for what I did. I gave to God. God even said we were righteous, and yet he struck me down because I doubted. 9 months later, 9 months of going from disbelief, it's not going to happen, to embarrassment, oh, Elizabeth is pregnant, to shame. I didn't trust God. Me, a priest, one of the highest orders, I didn't trust that God had a plan for me that was better than what I could ever imagine. I didn't trust in the one who I once claimed I lived for. And yet, God still blessed him. A healthy child was born. And then a celebration, a time of naming. And we get this would have been a huge thing, and the whole family would have been there, and friends and relatives and everyone. And they said, right, what are you going to name the child? They already expected they would probably name him Zechariah, because that's what you did in those days. You named him after the father or someone important in the family. And so they already assumed what was going to happen. And Elizabeth, having been told by Zechariah somehow, said, no, his name's going to be John. And the friends and relatives were like, what? Don't know if they actually said that. But there's no one in your family named John. That makes no sense. Clearly, childbirth, you've gone a bit doolally, Elizabeth. We need to speak with your husband. And so they get to Zechariah, and they say, right, they somehow write things out and say, we want to know what the name is. Your wife's gone a bit loopy. What is his name going to be? And here we go. An opportunity. All that faithfulness, all that waiting, all that work, his name's going to be Zechariah Jr. Why not? Let's be honest, that's what would have gone through our minds. You've given so much to God, and now Zechariah had 9 months where he couldn't speak or hear. How frustrating must that have been? But here was an opportunity, a holy moment, where Zechariah could have said, I trust God implicitly, or I'm going to do my own thing. Because why not? I deserve it, don't I? All that work I've done in the past, all the things I have seen, all of the sacrifices I have made, don't I deserve a little bit of me? A little bit of my time? Why do I have to keep giving and giving and giving? Here's an opportunity. We're going to live our lives. We're going to do the best we can. I still believe in you, God, because obviously you've done the miraculous. But you know what? I just want to be able to do things my way. I want to be able to live the way I think is right. And I have no idea what went through Zechariah's mind. Maybe he was completely and totally a servant of God. I don't know. David was a man after God's own heart, and yet he committed adultery, committed murder. So maybe in his humanity, Zechariah may have thought, I don't really want to do this. But he was faithful. And so he wrote down, his name will be John. It wasn't a big thing. It didn't change the world. Just something little. His name will be John. And in his faithfulness, his mouth was opened, his ears became clear, and he praised God. He began to speak instantly, praising God. If you've had 9 months of misery and woe and frustrations and unable to speak, is the first thing you're going to say is praise God? Is the first thing you're going to be like, finally I can speak. Let me tell you what's happened. This is the things that took place. This is why I was made deaf and dumb. This is, and here's my excuses. Instead, he began praising God because he recognized that his plans were nowhere near as good as God's plans. Zechariah didn't change the world. He didn't sacrifice his life. He didn't give away all of his earnings. He simply agreed to do what was asked of him. But through this, God acted. I must confess that sometimes I'm envious of my of my mates. Sorry. I see them in their churches. I've got lots of friends who are leaders of churches. And I hear their stories, and I do get envious. And they talk about, oh yeah, we've had our 20th baptism this year. We've had another 40 people come. We've had this. We've seen the miraculous. We've seen someone who had a massive illness. And I'm a bit envious. That's nothing to do with you guys. But I see that and I think, I would love to be in that situation. But God is saying, be faithful with what you have. So I have you lot. And I have to be faithful in that. I don't know if I should be laughing or you should be laughing, or if God's laughing. I don't know.
You're very blessed.
But I'm very blessed. I'm so blessed. But I have to be faithful with what God has given me. I have to be faithful because God has plans. God has a purpose. God sees tomorrow. God knows what his church is going to be like next year. God knows what he's going to do in your life next year. I know physically some of us can't do the teas and coffees. I know financially some of us can't give lots and lots of money. I know spiritually some of us struggle with certain areas. I know from speaking, you don't have the eloquence like I do. But you can still give with what you do have. You can still pray. You can, some of you, still serve. You can, some of you, still give. You can, some of you, still encourage. You can, some of you, still put out chairs. You can, some of you, do many things. You see, our responsibility as Christians, and I will say that, just as believers, our responsibility is to be faithful with what God has given us. It's God who makes the miracle. I'll say that again. Our responsibility as believers is to act out in faith, to trust God, and to be responsible with what God has given us. It's his choice to turn it into a miracle. In the Bible, we read a story where Jesus feeds 5,000. And he did so with some boy's lunch. That's it. That boy did not think, I cannot wait until God blesses this. All he said was, someone needs some food. Jesus is asking for some food. Well, this is all I have. Okay, it's what? Here. It's just lunch. That's all it is. It's just a few quid. It's just 20 minutes of my time. It's just, how you doing, mate? Good that you're here. It's just, I'm going to make some soup for someone and take it to their house. It's just some flowers. It's just. And God says, I will take that and I will feed 5,000. I will take that and I will bless a nation. I will take that and I will change the world. With God, all things are possible. Some of you have prayed. Well, all of us have prayed. Sorry, I shouldn't pause. There's certain times where you shouldn't pause. Some of you have prayed for the miraculous. You've prayed for a change of circumstances. You've prayed for situations. And we read these words and we think God can do all things. All things are possible. God can change everything. We did read earlier, and I did mention this previous, that God's decisions, God's plans are completely different than ours. And so we may be praying for something to take place, and God is saying, I got something more for that. But he still answers us. But it's in his way. God will take what you give and turn it into the miraculous. The question is whether or not you'll be faithful with the little you have. The everyday, the ordinary. Nothing big, nothing major. And so my challenge to you is this. Will you pray? If you can't do this, will you pray? We've got the party going on Tuesday evening. I can't make it. It's late at night. I don't like driving at night. I get it. I can't really help out because I don't like young people. I hope it's not the case. I can't really do certain things, but I can pray for it. So I will pray. So Shane, I'm letting you know and letting all the other helpers know I'm going to pray because that's what I can do. I can't make it next Sunday, but what I can do is encourage those people who will be coming. I can't go out and preach the gospel. What I can do is write a note and just say, here you go. I'm going to call her out. I know you shouldn't, Margaret. You have blessed more children than I think you're aware of with those little jelly babies. This is such a small thing, but God has blessed so many people as a result of it. And the amount of times I've heard the children talk about it. And I have and the older children, and I have no idea what's going to happen in 20 years' time to some of these kids. But I guarantee some of them will remember, I used to go to church. Hopefully they still go to church. But I firmly believe some of them will say, I remember this lovely woman who used to give us sweets. That is significant. Why? Because I am being faithful with what I have. That's huge. I don't mean to embarrass you, Margaret. You're being faithful. And some of you, and I'm carrying on, but I just need to say this. Some of you have so much to offer. More than you can ever imagine. And it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be working. You don't have to come in here on a day off and spend 10 hours working at stuff. Some of you have just an ability to say, I'm glad you came. Some of you have the ability to send a text to go, was thinking about you today. Some of you have the ability to write cards, to do other things. And God is just saying, I've given you these gifts. I've given you these things. What are you going to do with them? The opportunity is there. And God will do the miraculous. But only if you're willing. Jesus walked along the shore and said, will you follow me? Some did. Some didn't. We're coming up to a time where we're going to celebrate the birth of Jesus, our Savior. And I had a picture which would probably never, ever be drawn. And it's a picture of a baby impaled on a cross. What a horrible, horrible picture. But that's what this baby was born to do. To go on a cross. I can theologically explain it, but I cannot, as a father, explain it. That's what is going to happen on Christmas Day. That's why we come. For those of you who believe, that is what we are celebrating. The birth of a boy who's come into this world because he loves each and every one of us. And all he says to you is, do you have faith in me? Will you live for me? And each and every day, I offer you an opportunity of a holy moment that I can change your life and the lives of those around you. I'm going to stop there.